Okay, thanks you for coming to my talk, Cryptanalysis versus reality. So let me start. Cryptanalysis in reality, maybe you all have an idea of what it is, but let me give some tentative definitions. So cryptanalysis is the study of methods for obtaining the meaning of encrypted information without access to the secret information that is normally required to do so. So typically that is the key. But as you see, this definition is a bit narrow, a bit restrictive. For an attacker can have much different goals than decrypting or recovering the key, in particular when there is no key at all. That's why we have much better definition than this one. So one can say that the fundamental goal of cryptanalysts is to violate one or several security notions for algorithms that claim, implicitly or explicitly, to satisfy these notions. So that is really a much better definition. You can think, for example, of hash function. So the goal of an attacker can be to find a collision for hash function, in the case you have no key. Another goal can be to forge a valid MAC for HMAC, for example. Another goal would be to impersonate a user in an authentication protocol. Okay. Now, if you go back to reality, that's the state of things as they actually exist, not how you can idealize or dream them. Yet, as you know, reality is quite complex. When we make decisions in our lives, we have to simplify things. We cannot consider all the consequences of our actions. We cannot consider all the parameters. So implicitly, we simplify reality. And that's what cryptanalysts are doing. We simplify reality, we create models. We use models which are just mathematical objects that say what the attacker is allowed and not allowed to do, what we assume that the attacker can and can't do. So that's just a formal way of saying this. It's not something completely artificial. It's just what we need to do cryptanalysis. And it would be completely impossible to do serious cryptanalysis work without actually this model. So as you probably know, the models, they exclude the attacks that target the user instead of the crypto. So this includes, for example, bribery, coercion, burglary, keylogging, social engineering. Although if you attended the previous talk, these techniques are quite effective, quite powerful. But that's not the point of cryptanalysis. The point of cryptanalysis is the crypto. Okay. It doesn't mean that crypto is disconnected from reality. It means that the point of cryptanalysis is just crypto. Okay. So cryptanalysis used to be tightly connected to reality. What you see on the background is a machine called the bomb that was constructed by Alan Turing and his colleagues in 1939, and it was used to decrypt the communications of the Germans during World War II. I couldn't find a better example of cryptanalysis connected to reality. That was during World War II. Now, if you go back to 2011, things have really changed. So I slightly edited this Dilbert strip, and at the end have Wally who says, I use partial matching to be the related keys or some distinguisher on the radius round compression function. I didn't really make this up. You can really find this kind of statement in state-of-the-art research papers. If you don't believe me, let me show you some examples of very recent research. So we have examples of semi-free start near collision attacks, multi-collision distinguishers, related key attacks, pseudo blah blah blah, boomerang distinguisher on 34 rounds. Oops. That's not connected? Okay, looks better. Okay. So we have things like boomerang distinguishers with this completely insane complexity, known related key distinguishers. Known key, isn't the key supposed to be secret? That doesn't make sense. So when people who are not into this kind of thing, they read this, they tend to translate it into AES encryption is cracked or cipher false, hackers crack internet encryption. Pretty scary titles. So here we have a problem. So the problem is just that when it's broken in a model, it's not necessarily broken in reality. Why do we have this situation? One of the reasons is that we use the same language, we use the same words. We use the words attack, broken, and in the world of models, broken doesn't mean broken in reality. So as cryptanalysts, as the academic people, maybe we should say to ourselves, maybe we lost connection with reality. Do our models make sense? Does it make sense to do cryptanalysis at all? Because if you look at people who do real-world stuff like pen testing, you see that crypto is usually bypassed. And that's something that said Adi Shamir, who is a crypto guy, and he recognized this. So let you read those few lines. Okay. He finishes by saying there are much simpler ways of penetrating the security system. You can forge a malicious PDF, send it to an employee, and you're done. Okay. So this gives the question, is cryptanalysis relevant at all? Does it make sense to spend time, energy, and money attempting to break ciphers where nobody cares after all? That's a bit a provocative question. So that's what I would like to answer in this talk. I will start by briefly talking about physical attacks on the crypto, not on the people. Then the main part of the talk will be algorithmic attacks. I will make a brief state-of-the-art on the security of ciphers that we all know. I will give you 5 reasons why the attacks that you hear about in the news or in literature are not necessarily attacks in the real world. Then I will talk about the human factor or the cognitive biases in play before saying a few words about AES, cipher that we all know and we all use every day. Okay, so physical attacks. So, you know, if you use your favorite internet browser, you go to an HTTPS website, you have this little log that means that you are perfectly secure. So this uses, for example, RSA cryptography with 2048 bits of modulus. But that's not the level of security. The level of security of this model size is approximately 100 bits. It means that if you were to attack RSA, it would take approximately 2 to the 100 operations to break RSA by factoring the modulus. So I don't enter the details by seeing what an operation is, but you get the idea. So this is infeasible with today's computer. Now the question, can we do better than this? The first option is to use a quantum computer. It would take only 2 to the 33 operations using Shor's algorithm. The good news or bad news is that we don't know how to build quantum computers. We don't even know if it's physically possible to construct quantum computers. So let's think about other alternatives. How can you attack HTTPS faster than a quantum computer? Well, you can just compromise certificate authority. And that's much more powerful, 2 to the 0 operations. So what you see here is an excerpt from a ROC certificate that was issued to Google by the Dutch CA DigiNotar. You probably all know the story. And it was not issued on the records of Google, but apparently a hacker intruded the system of DigiNotar. And even though he didn't have the actual private key, he had the power to create certificates. And it was allegedly used by the Iranian government to spy on its citizens through man-in-the-middle attacks. But if you see the certificate, they use SHA-1, they use RSA encryption, relatively strong cryptography. But the point is that it could as well have been SHA-512 or RSA with 16 billions of bits. This wouldn't have changed anything because the crypto was completely bypassed. The attack didn't care about the crypto that was used. Another example of such bypass is what happened last year to the secure product, secure USB drive by Kingston SanDisk and Verbatim. So they were FIPS 142 certified. They use AES encryption with 256 bits of security. But to decrypt the data on the drive, you needed a password. And the problem is that they made a very stupid verification of the password. It was made in the host PC. And when the password was correct, the PC was just sending a constant signal to the drive, okay, saying the password is valid. It was very easy to break. No amazing complexity. Crypto completely bypassed. So sometimes the crypto is not bypassed, but it's exploited to attack the system. Yeah, it happens. And it's because it's maybe misused or misimplemented. So I'll give you 3 short examples that you've probably read about in the news. The first one is very funny. It's the case of Sony's PlayStation 3. So Sony has problem with random numbers. So ECDSA is elliptic curve-based digital signature algorithm. It's probably secure. It's certified by all the standards that you want. It's used by NIST. It's used by the NSA. But you need randomness. And if your randomness is not random, then the system completely breaks down. So because of this stupid implementation error, one can recover the key just very easily by doing a multiplication and a division. You don't even need to know how ECDSA works. You don't need to know about elliptic curves. So the core system was completely broken due to this implementation error. Another classical case is that of RC4 in web. So the Wi-Fi protection web, they use this relatively secure stream cipher RC4, which is okay when the key is secret. The problem with web is that they make a part of the key secret and another part of the key that is public and predictable from one session to another. So if RC4 were ideal, perfectly perfect, this wouldn't cause any problem, but the problem is that you have some internal biases in the structure of RC4. And if you make part of the key public, then the biases can be exploited to recover the key. That's what happened to web. And the last example is a different scenario, is what happened with the Xbox. So Microsoft, they wanted to create a new, to make an update that would use a hash function based on a very light block cipher. So they went to Google, they typed tiny encryption algorithm. You can try it. And what you will find, the first entry that shows up is T, tiny encryption algorithm, which is a relatively decent cipher, as long as you use it as a cipher, as long as the key is secret. If you use it to construct a hash function, it's completely different because the key, what is used as a key is not secret, is the message. And the problem is in T is that you have equivalent keys. So different keys, but that give the same input-output relations for the cipher. And if you convert this into a hash function, this allows you to find collisions very efficiently. And that's why the security failed in this case. Now what happens if you use good crypto, you implement it well, you use it well, you use very random numbers, but you are in a hostile environment. So what does it mean to work in a hostile environment? It means possibility of side channel attacks. Side channel attacks first in software. It can be, for example, leaks on the time of execution. And the case of AES is sometimes problematic because if you implement AES in software, you have to use big tables. And access to those tables take time that is dependent on the key. So in other words, you have timing leaks. The time of execution is dependent on your key. So by simple information theory, by making time measurements, you get information on your key. And last year, so you had this allegedly secure implementation in OpenSSL 0.9.8. But some Swiss researchers, they found a way to attack it. The attack was very efficient in a few seconds. And the interesting thing here is that you don't need to know the plain text. You don't even know to know the ciphertext. You just need to make some pretty accurate timing measurements. And then you win. And it works also on ARM9. So for information, OpenSSL has been patched. Even though it's not very well documented in OpenSSL, but I hope that the version 1.0 is fixed. Another side channel that can be exploited is how an error in the encoding is managed by the system. So this is the padding oracle tool. So the guys who made these padding oracle attacks, they exploit in part the time of execution, but they also exploit how the system responds to an error in the padding. So that can be seen as well as some such an information, and that was exploited in this padding oracle attack. But such attacks, they are much more famous when it comes to hardware. It's much more powerful than software side chain attacks. You can do power analysis, SPA, electromagnetic analysis, glitch-neck attacks, microprobing, and even more powerful laser injection attacks. So you can send laser impacts to your system to modify the content of the registers of the memory, to modify the instructions that will be executed. For example, if you have AES 128, normally you would do 10 rounds of encryption. But if you send a photon decounter so that instead of making 10 rounds, you only make 1 round, then it's much easier to break. This kind of thing happens in reality. Focus ion beam is even more powerful. You can directly modify the circuit, modify the behavior of your circuit. But if you look at all those attacks, they target the crypto, they don't target the user, but more precisely they target the implementation, not the algorithm. So if you want to evaluate the intrinsic security of your cipher, you have to view it as an algorithm, independently of the implementation. And that's what algorithmic attacks are about. So let me define it in a quite informal way. So an algorithmic attack is an attack that targets the function, the crypto, as an algorithm, and the attack itself is described as an algorithm. And they are completely independent of the implementation. Don't care whether it's hardware or software, you look at a sequence of instruction, at an algorithm. Okay. So I'm going to focus on symmetric functions like block ciphers, stream ciphers, hash functions, so random number generators, and message authentication codes. There would be very interesting things to say about public encryption or signatures, about authentication protocol, but I don't have that much time. Okay. So if you consider the ciphers, so these last years there has been some news about AES. You probably heard that AES was broken. It's not that broken. The same for Ghost. If you follow the crypto groups on LinkedIn, or if you look at the news in UK newspapers, you may have read that Ghost is broken. That's wrong. Same for the 3GPP encryption, Kazumi. It's completely safe. Triple DES is safe as long as you don't need more than 112 bits of security. If you read Bruce Nayer's blog, you might have read that SHA-1 is broken. It's not. You can also read that Whirlpool is broken, but it's not broken in reality. So it's safe to use all those functions. Yet there are some cases where the crypto is a bit more broken. That's the case of DES. So DES is broken not due to cryptanalytic attacks, but it's broken just due to its small key size, 56 bits. If you use a cluster of FPGAs, in 2 or 3 days you can find a key. A51, GSM encryption, there are some problems with the ciphers that facilitates actual attacks. And apparently there has been some proof of concept realized, and the attack seems to work. And last but not least, the case of MD5. So don't use MD5. Actually, in practice, it's safe if you just need pre-image resistance, if you don't care about collisions. But it's prudent to avoid MD5 completely now. We have much better functions. So you might wonder, do we have ciphers that are not broken, even in theory? Well, of course, we have plenty of them. The default cipher in OpenPGP Cas5 is not very well known, but it's very secure. ID, it was designed by researchers not very far from Lucerne in Zurich in 1991, and it's still secure. It's one of the ciphers that resisted the best. IDNX, it's a new generation of ID. The 2 EAS finalists, Serpent and 2Fish, so Serpent by Elie Bihar, Morse Anderson, and some colleagues, and 2Fish by Bruce Nayer and other people. When it comes to stream ciphers, so stream ciphers are generally lighter to implement. Grain 128A for hardware is very good. It fits in fewer than 3,000 gates. Salsa 20 by Dan Bernstein. You can find it in the library Knuckle. Very good too. And if you want to choose a, sorry? Yep. Yeah. So I won't answer now. I hope that the rest of the talk will answer. Thank you. So, yeah, what's the hash function? So, it's safe to use SHA-2. It's safe to use RapeMD if you use TrueCrypt. I think the default function, the default hash function is TrueCrypt is RapeMD, and the default cipher is AES, and you can also use a Serpent. Okay. So now you might wonder, why do we care? There are many people doing cryptanalysis. There are armies of PhDs in universities publishing papers and papers and papers about how not to break ciphers. Yet we never see real breaks. We hear about non-breaks in the news, but real breaks seldom happen. So why? Why is it this? So the first reason is that many attacks published, like the attack on AES, have a very high complexity, very large number of operations. Last year there was an attack by Japanese researchers from NTT on MD5. It was a pre-image attack, so which means it was an attempt to invert the function. That's supposed to be one way. It had complexity 2 to the 123.4 operations, whereas ideally you would expect 2 to the 128. So this is called an attack just because 123 is a smaller number than 128, not because it has anything to do with security. So apparently these attacks don't matter as long as the effort is infeasible or if the effort is much larger than that of other attacks. Maybe the most important impact on the security is you can no longer claim that MD5 has 128 bits of security. If you are a company, you sell crypto, it's not mathematically correct to say that it has 120 bits of security, but in practice it doesn't change anything. So it's a bit of a philosophical problem. So let me give you this quote by a colleague, John Kelsey, from the US NIST. It says that the difference between 80 and 108-bit security is like the difference between a mission to Mars and a mission to Alpha Centauri. So one very difficult and one almost impossible. And continue saying that I think there is no meaningful difference between 192-bit and 256 bits of keys in terms of brute force. Impossible is impossible. So in other words, we don't care about the difference between the numbers as long as it's impossible. If you go back to reality for a minute, let's look at what state-of-the-art CPUs can do. That's a Core i7. At 2 gigahertz, it makes 2 to the 33 clocks per second, which means 2 to the 58 in 1 year, 2 to the 68 in 1,000 years, and 2 to the 116 in a bit more than 13 billions of years. So if you compare those numbers to the 123 we saw before, well, you conclude that even 2 to the 100 is very secure. So there are some subtleties. Sometimes you can parallelize the attack, you can increase, you can decrease your chance of success, but still we deal with huge numbers. Another quote by security researchers, they say that the encryption doesn't have to be very strong, it just must be stronger than the other weak links. That's plain common sense. But if you look at the cryptographic literature, many people don't have this common sense reasoning. Cryptographers focus on crypto and they tend to forget that there is something outside crypto. Okay. Now, let me give you an overview of the second reason why attacks are not always attacks in the real world. Is that people publish results on building blocks of the functions, not on the full function. For example, there was this collision attack on a SHA-3 candidate called Lane. So SHA-3 will be the new hash function standard of the US government next year. So it had complexity slightly below the ideal complexity, 96 instead of 128. It did not lead to an attack on the hash function. It was just invalidating a security proof. It was not invalidating the result, but just the proof. Yet, the US standard institution, they deemed the attack was dangerous enough to eliminate Lane from the competition. quite surprising. So you might wonder, why did they do this? There are two interpretations to attacks on building blocks and components of a cryptographic function. The first one is to say, well, okay, it's better to have an attack on a building block than no attack at all. Maybe it's a sign that there would be something bigger. Maybe it's just the beginning. If you read Bruce Nair, you know the quote, attacks never get worse, always get better. So you should conclude, let's be prudent and don't use this. On the other hand, you might think that, okay, these guys, they published this result on a subcomponent of the function. So it means that they have tried really hard to break the system, to break the whole function. And what they could only come up with is this non-result on a building block. So this can be seen as an evidence that people have tried to break it but failed. It's an evidence that there was some analysis on it. And in general, it's suspicious if there is no result at all on a crypto function. If there is no Cryptanalysis published on reduced version, you don't know if people have looked at it seriously. Now, if we move to the third reason, very interesting one, is that Cryptanalysis, we have very strong models, very strong security models. We assume that the adversary is very powerful. We assume that he can make chosen plain text queries, chosen ciphertext queries, and recently we also assume that they can make related key attacks. So what is a related key attack is where you assume that you have access to an oracle that gives you the encryption or the hash or whatever, where the key is a modified version of the original key. But not any modification, you choose the modification of the key. You choose the function f that defines the key k prime, which is a function of the original key k. Quite surprisingly, when Turing and his colleagues in 1940, when they broke Enigma, they implicitly used rated keys because the operators were doing mistakes using the wrong key, and then they resend the message again with the correct key. Yet the modern version was only introduced in 1992. So if you use any state-of-the-art protocol, any serious protocol, it's completely infeasible, it's completely unrealistic. There are some cases of protocols like EMV or 3GPP where it seems doable, but the model is very special too. I want to give you a more concrete example of what a rated key attack can be. So there was an attack by Russian researchers 2 years ago on AES 256, complexity 2 to the 119 instead of 2 to the 256. They use 4 related keys. And if you look at the paper, the research paper in details, they not only use rated keys, they use related subkeys. So let me try to summarize. They assume that the attacker can ask for an encryption with a key that is such that the subkey of the third round has a very specific modification compared to the original subkey. Well, that's even more insane. Yes. Round keys, yeah. Round keys. And actually, they admit that the attacks are mainly of theoretical interest at best and do not present a threat to practical applications. I hope you'll all agree with that. Okay. Now let's look at what happens in reality. So in the field where I'm working in pay-TV encryption, we have very different models. So we encrypt the MPEG stream, that is send us TS and transport stream packets, with a cipher called CSA, Common Scrambling Algorithm. You know, in pay-TV, we don't encrypt, we scramble. So the key of CSA has 48 or 64 bits. That looks quite small. But if you look at the use case, how it's used, then you can't modify the key. You don't know the key. You only know ciphertext. You know some part of the header of the packets, but you don't know a complete block. So you cannot make known plaintext attacks, just partially known plaintext. You cannot make time memory trade-offs, rainbow tables, this kind of thing. And last but not least, you have only 10 seconds to break the cipher. Why? Because the key is refreshed every 10 seconds, and the new key is completely independent of the previous one. That's a model you find in a real world, maybe a very extreme one, but still, that's what hackers have to fight. But if in practice, people they don't care if these pirates, they don't break the crypto, they just share the control word, they just share the key, and that's it. So they bypass crypto again. So the next reason is that there is not only time, there is also space. There is also memory. If you look in details at those attacks, at the attacks on MD5, on Lane, on AES-256, so they use a huge amount of operations. They also use a huge amount of memory. More than 1,024 TB bytes, insane quantities of memory. But that's not free. You need to pay for this. You need infrastructure. The latency to access a random element in a huge memory is not that small. And the problem when you look at the analysis in those papers, they make the completely insane assumption that it takes the same time to access an element in this kind of memory as to make an XOR between two words. Yeah. And so if you are in the real world, you should compare these attacks with generic attacks with the same budget, with the same money, with the same hardware. And then the comparison is much different. So if you have a lot of money, you will not do a stupid brute force using a single computer. You will build a cluster of machines. You will build a cluster of ASICs or of FPGAs. And this is much more powerful than a stupid brute force. You should look at Dan Bernstein's paper on this topic. It's called Understanding Brute Force. Okay. And the most crazy reason is that now we are breaking ciphers not by recovering the key, but by distinguishing them. So what does it mean? Distinguishing attacks. So it used to be before the finding of a statistical bias. For example, in my hash function, the first bit is more often 0 than 1, or the byte FF is a bit more frequent than the other bytes. Now we call an attack anything that is something, anything that shows an unexpected behavior of the function. Sometimes when we look at AES, we devise attacks where we assume that the key is known, and sometimes that the key is chosen. There are attacks that are called known key attacks. There are attacks called chosen key attacks. The goal of those attacks is just to find a relation between the input and the output that is not expected. And it's very hard to define what this means. Johan Deman, one of the inventors of AES, he called those attacks, you know what I mean, attacks, because we don't know how to define them. And this is an example of attack on AES that appeared 2 years ago. So they found keys, K1, K2, K3, and so on, and plaintext P1, P2, and relations, delta and lambda, that satisfy this relation. I'll leave you 10 seconds to try to understand it. It's called Q multi-collisions. It's quite meaningless, but they got a paper published because of that. Okay, no impact on security. The biggest impact is on the resume of the researchers. Okay. Yes. Will not comment this. So, yes. On the one hand, it's not useful, it's not meaningful in terms of real security. On the other hand, the attacks are very sophisticated, sometimes very clever. In terms of mathematical techniques, they use quite advanced algorithms. To attack AES, they use graph theory. So it's interesting for mathematicians sometimes. The best argument I can find. So we have seen that there are those 5 reasons why attacks are not always attacks, and we have 2 general interpretations. So the pessimistic one is that, oh, it's a bad sign and there must be something bigger. The crypto is not ideal, it may be weak, it may be broken in 10 years. And the optimistic approach is that, well, people have looked at it during 3 years and they could only find a distinguishing attack with the insane memory requirements, so it's safe. So people have very different interpretations. People are very strongly biased. So I tried to find reasons why we have these biases, and the first I could find in favor of the first interpretation is what we call numerology, cryptographic numerology. So I didn't make this up, it's a notion introduced by other researchers. And the idea is that you would define the security of the system just in terms of key size. They said the concept is as long as your encryption keys are that big, then you're fine. Because you can put a sticker on your product, say 2000 bit security, and then you don't have to worry about the rest of the system. And why we do this? We do this because choosing a key size is very easy. Just use a random generator, you take a key of 5 to 12 bits, and now you have much better security. If you Google the internet for snake oil security products, you will find things like virtual encryption with 3000 bits of security. It's just marketing, it's just advertisement. And in this case, it's a specific case of zero-risk bias. A zero-risk bias is the tendency to reduce a small risk to a completely zero risk. So you will pay a lot of money, of energy, of power to reduce this negligible risk, whereas it could be economically much more interesting to reduce another risk, say from 50 or 30%. In the case of crypto, it translates into reducing the risk of the scary new attack. Maybe tomorrow someone will break AES, so let's over-encrypt with AES, with Serpent, with two fish. I found this in the real world in a cloud storage system. Maybe you heard people completely panicked at the idea of using RSA with only 1024 bits. You say, yeah, well, you should move to 2048 or 4096 RSA, otherwise the system will be broken. Problem is that we always have the law of unintended consequences. If you use stronger crypto, if you use bigger RSA moduli, then you get slower crypto. And then it's too slow sometimes, it's not deployed, and at the end of the day, you get less security. So that's how many people think about crypto. That's why they are so scared when they hear about attacks on AES. Now the next bias is the bias towards the optimistic approach. They say, well, ciphers are never broken. But why are they never broken? Because we never hear about broken ciphers. We only remember the unbroken ciphers that are deployed in security products or in standards. We never hear about ciphers that are broken by unknown researchers and published in conferences in a small town in India with 25 attendees. We never hear about those attacks. Because if I give you a very good example of this, there's a SHA-3 competition for the new hash function. They received 64 submissions, and 56 of them were published in 2008. So we tried to break them, and we could break 14 with actual attacks that work, that could be implemented, and that could be verified. We did find actual cohesions. We did find actual pre-images. These are real-world attacks. 3 close to practical attacks in complexity, approximately 2 to the 60, what you can do in a few months with a good hardware, and 14 very high complexity attacks. This looks much more balanced. And those 14 plus 3 ciphers that were broken with practical attacks, we will never hear about them again because they're considered as broken, and nobody will ever use them. And that's why practical attacks, very powerful attacks, they kill ciphers before they are used. The ciphers that are deployed, they have always been analyzed for years and years by competent people. That's why there seems to be no insecure cipher, but there are many insecure ciphers. Now, yes. So I'm sorry to inform you that AES is broken by a groundbreaking attack. They registered all this. It's the groundbreaking attack, the scary new attack that everybody expects. Yeah, it's broken. Fortunately, if you look at the facts and not that how you dream, the reality is much more reassuring. These attacks, they are just 4 times faster than brute force. 4 times. And on top of that, they require a lot of memory, a lot of data. The attack on AES-128, it needs 2 to the 88 plaintext ciphertext pairs. You need to collect this number of input-outputs of AES. Whereas if you do the straightforward brute force, you need only 1, so 2 to the 0 plaintext ciphertext pair. And it's very likely that if you implement this attack in, say, in alien technology with ultra-powerful computers, quantum computers, it's very likely that the generic brute force will complete before these attacks. And I've heard very interesting reactions by customers and colleagues. So we have one of our customers, the crypto expert of another company. He said, yeah, I've read the paper. They say that AES is insecure. So in the new product that you deliver, we want to have AES with 42 or I don't know how many rounds and more stronger S boxes. So I tried to explain to him what was the result, what was the impact of the attacks. But he was persuaded that AES was insecure, that AES would be broken in 10 years. On the other hand, we have other people that are completely blinded by the 3 letters of AES, say, oh, it's nothing, AES is safe, we can implement it however we want, it will always be safe. And because of this, they ignore such an attacks, they ignore cache timing attacks, they ignore bad implementations. So these are the pessimistic and the optimistic interpretation of this kind of attack. So now let me briefly conclude what I said in this talk. So the algorithmic attacks on the Pearl scheme, they have nothing to do with security. They're just theoretical results due to high complexity, strong models, attacks on building blocks, distinguishers. Because the weak ciphers, we don't see them, we don't use them, they are broken before, they are killed before. Okay. And one of my colleagues, Dunkelman, he says, it's very correct, we don't break ciphers, we evaluate their security. If you look at the attacks on the AES, so now it may be fair to say that it has security of 126 bits. But it's just theory, impossible is impossible. Okay. And we should look at the facts, we should be careful of the zero-risk bias and survivorship bias. We should look at the actual complexity of the attacks, what the real experts say. We should be careful when we read the media when they say there is a groundbreaking attack or a scary attack. And funny, yeah, AES is fine, but weak implementations are the biggest threat, especially in software. Okay. So I'd like to recommend you 3 related readings. Maybe you heard about the leakage resilient cryptography. It's a theoretical subfield of crypto where people investigate schemes that resist to a partial leakage of the state or of the computation. They may, for example, assume that half of your RSA key is published, and they will try to devise a system that is resilient to this kind of leaks. And some people try to compare those models with reality. The second one is about brute force, how to use the cloud infrastructure to brute force systems, how to break AES, RSA, using Amazon S3 Cloud. And the last one by Pascal Genot is very interesting too. Investigates the security of libraries like Crypto++, OpenSSL, CryptoLib, Knuckle, against side channel attacks, leakage attacks, fault attacks. And his conclusion is that all these libraries, all these open source libraries are very weak. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and if you have any question, thank you.
So what is your opinion, or is there any model or anything to judge a well-researched cipher that has some deficiencies versus less researched ciphers that have come out clean?
Yeah.
Is that like personal judgment, or is there any sort of reasonable way to decide
No.
such?
So there are a few heuristics to judge of the quality of cipher. First, it's quite subjective, but you should look at who designed the ciphers, how it was published. Is it a non-researchers who published it in a well-known conference? You should search for attacks on the ciphers in the literature, and then it's not always easy to interpret these attacks because researchers, they want to become famous. So if you read the abstract, people tend to overestimate the impact of the result. They will say it's a big result, it's a big attack, cipher is broken. So you should be very careful. You'd better look at the numbers than at the claims by the cryptanalysts.
Right. But any discovery about a cipher that reduces its effectiveness does have the chance to be used as a jumping board for another attack. So, is there? I mean.
So, let me tell you the story of SHA-1. So SHA-1 was a replacement of SHA-0. There was an attack published by Chinese researchers with complexity 2 to the 68, if I'm not mistaken. A few weeks later, there was an attack in 2 to the 65. A few weeks later, they found out that the 65 attack doesn't work. The year after, they found an attack in 2 to the 62 or 61. And last year or 2 years ago, Australian people found an attack in 2 to the 52. And all those attacks, they were refinements of the new attack. But some people tried to verify the attacks, tried to implement them, and they found a flaw in the attack. They found some issues with the probability. The 52 attack doesn't work, the 61 doesn't work, and they're not sure that the 68 attack works. So all those refinements, they were very incremental. It's not like if you go from 68 to 32, it's just very few. So this happens, but it's very unlikely that you will have a huge breakthrough from impractical to practical. Yes?
I've seen a lot of research where things like you have just been telling us actually was happening. How is one able to actually like sort out the black sheep in the paper distribution mafia out there to validate the findings? It's like for even people that have been educated in writing crypto algorithms and like implementing them safely and stuff like that. For them, it's even hard to get some of the papers in any kind of coding language coded into real stuff, right? So for all the math experts out there, it's going to be even harder sometimes. And how would you say you can get those black sheep to not disturb you in your time?
So here
because basically it's like a waste of time to implement something which is from somebody that has been deploying papers that were complete nonsense in the past, right?
So you talk about implementing an attack or implementing a cipher?
An attack.
An attack. The problem is the difficulty of implementation and of verification. The latest attacks on AES, the authors, they try to implement the attack. They implement all they could implement. They verified all they could verify, but there is a limit to this. You cannot complete the attack because the complexity is too high. You cannot make sure that it will work. So they made some partial verification. They verified that some probabilities were okay, but you can never have an evidence that the attack works until you implement the complete attack. And There are some cases, the case of MD5. So in this case, they could implement it. They could get the collision because the attack was practical. But if you want to verify by yourself the attack,
It's not only about ciphers, right? It's
Yeah.
like you have protocols where there are errors in, and there have been papers published about that.
Mm.
And sometimes it's just hard to grasp
Yeah.
what's
But
like, okay, there's like this
a problem
3,
with
4,
that is
5
that
pages out of the documentation missing
Yeah.
that you would need for anything to validate
Yeah.
what's out there.
And if you make the effort to implement, to verify the results, the problem that you won't get the paper published, or you may post it in a forum, but they never publish papers where people are pointing out mistakes in previous papers. We never do that. People are too busy increasing their resume. They don't spend the time to verify the proof. They don't spend the time to implement the attacks. So if anyone is willing to do this, it would be very good. But it's a big problem we have in the community. We have plenty of results, plenty of papers, but no one bothers verifying the results.
About that, I'd like to add to the SHA-1 conclusion there.
Yeah.
Recently, Tavis or Mandy published a 90-bit near collision for SHA-1. I'd just like to add that.
It was on the full.
Full rounds. But it wasn't on an academic
Yeah,
crypto
yeah.
conference.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I know there was a proof of concept in a reduced version of SHA-1. I don't know the details of Davis's attack, but I should look at it. Okay. Another question? Okay. Thank you.